viewers, what's going on? It's Preacher. Let's do some armchair class dev, right? Let's do armchair class dev. We love it. I'm always wary about doing these because either you're going to agree or disagree, and that usually results in a thumbs down. What a twat. Fuck you. Or everyone wants you to do it for every single class, which is a massive undertaking, which I'm not sure I'm ready for that. But as we looked at the Shadow Priest yesterday, and a lot of people were confused, the damage looks fine. What are you talking about? This looks okay to me. Maybe I didn't stress the points enough, but of course, and then the How to Priest guys from the Discord got in contact with me, and they were like, it's so infuriating because we made so many suggestions on changes. I haven't read them yet, but what I thought would be fun is how would I fix Shadow? Like, if I was in charge, like, what would I do to this spec to bring it in line with where I think would be better? Obviously, that's all we're ever trying to do, despite the people who hate on us talking about this stuff. And I'm not talking about me specifically here. I'm talking about anybody who suggests that maybe something might be wrong with precious World of Warcraft. Then you must be a maniac and a hater and a whiner and all these kind of things. No, we're just trying to get the best result for everybody. What a horrible bunch of people we are. We think there's a problem here. You might not see it, but we're pretty sure there's a problem there. In fact, most of the people playing it think there's a problem with it. Maybe we can make it better. That's all. That's it. Nothing more. So let's do some armchair deving anyway. What would I do with the Shadow Priest? It's a good question, and I think it's actually relatively easy, if I'm being honest with you. First of all, Insanity, the mechanic, the core foundation of the spec, the Insanity mechanic, it's got to go, right? We've got to take it out. It doesn't work in too many situations. And what it's done is, I look at it as like they're trying to build a house of cards, right? It's very complex to get all the talents and all the spells and their insanity generation and the decay of insanity and uptime of void form and all these things. It's very complex. That's the house of cards, like trying to balance it perfectly. But it's built on a jelly, right? It's built on a jelly that keeps moving around and wibbly-wobbly. Because the practical sense is you're doing so many different things in the game. You're doing small-scale AoE, single target that doesn't last very long, single target that lasts very long, big-time AoE. You're doing all these different things. And you're trying to balance this house of cards on this completely unknown and ever-changing and ever-flowing scenario, that having this fluid mechanic, which is how I would describe Insanity, because it's up and down and it's different generations and it's all moving around, I would say it's rather fluid, doesn't work. As fun as it is, but don't worry, we're not losing it entirely in my suggestions. I'm just saying having it as the core basis of the spec, I don't think works. And let's pull that out for now. Now, the good side of that is, if we take that mechanic away, that frees up the Shadow Priest massively. It frees it up massively. One, you can get rid of so many talents that are designed around trying to balance insanity gain in different situations, which has led to this clusterfuck of a talent system, which doesn't make any sense in some situations. And you can clearly see that some talents are purely designed around trying to get you into void form quicker in certain scenarios, but not in others. And it's punishing in one way and helpful in another way. And they're all attached with this maddening, this does this insanity, this does this insanity, how will this scale, and all this stuff, that can go. We can clear that out, and that frees us up for more fun and interesting talents. Not only that, what we're left with is a really simple base spec that we've had for many years, which we can make work, right? We don't have to worry about Shadow Priest popping in about a void form and doing all this kind of crazy stuff. Don't have to worry about it anymore. We've just got a base, simple spec. On that note, a lot of people believe that specs that I like are mega complex, like some sort of like supercomputer, you know, they have like 50 procs that you've got to manage on that. Not true. Most of my favorite specs, as many of my old school viewers will know, are actually super simple ones. If like a Wrath Fury Warrior. Loved the Wrath Fury Warrior. It was really nice. Why? It felt good. That's all I'm looking for in most specs. Does it feel good? That's it. If it feels good, it can be simple, it can be complex, but as long as it feels good and it feels satisfying and rewarding, that's enough. It doesn't need to be complex. And in my mind, for WoW, you don't need more than 4 or 5 buttons at a very base level to make a spec. You don't need it to be more than that. More than that, you're kind of pushing out a lot of players, and also it's like you've got to focus too heavily on it, and this is like the base DPS. You don't need that. So I would like Shadow Priest to go back to Shadow with Pain, Vampiric Touch, Mind Blast, Mind Flay, and Mind Seer. Those are your basic spells. They all make sense. I'm going to add Shadow Word Death in. Shadow Word Death needs to come out of the talent tree. It's ridiculous that it's in there. It's too useful. It feels too good in so many situations. That's got to come back out. We're not worried about its insanity generation now. It can come back out as an executability. It's thematic. It's core. It makes sense to me. I mean, we're talking about spells that are existing in like all the Blizzard card games at this point. You know what I mean? For priests, it's such a core part of this of the class that it needs to come back out. That needs to come out of there. Okay. Would I return to Shadow Orbs? Is a big one that people keep bringing up. And Devouring Plague. For me, yes. I thought that was really fun. I liked that it ramped up when you could include death, so you got more orbs, so you could feel like you were getting more powerful towards the end of the fight. I really enjoyed the Shadow Orb system. Is that the best way to go back around it? I'm not convinced entirely if we can't think of something better, but I don't want to get into mega detail here. But I think as a baseline, you could say a return to Shadow Orbs would make sense here. What's the next change I would make? I would pull out Surrender to Madness. I think it's a wonderful name for an ability, and I would make that the 2 or 3 minute cooldown for Shadow Priests. But I would change it so that Surrender to Madness lasts a minimum amount of time, but it uses the Insanity mechanic, right? So you pop Surrender to Madness, you have that wonderful animation of the Shadow Priest rising up, turning into the Void form, the tentacles, all the Cthulhu, going wiggly, wobbly, and your hentai's undergoing. You get a full Insanity bar, and your job during Surrender to Madness is to use as many abilities as possible. Yeah, it brings Void Bolt back into it, all that kind of stuff, as it does right now when you're in normal Void form. And it gradually increases your haste, as it does now. And as I say, I would have it have a minimum amount of time. Yeah, so your Insanity Drain lasts a minimum amount of time. But good players can extend it, and over the course of the expansion, that would become slightly better, because you would have more spells to fit in, your Insanity would last longer, which means it's a really cool cooldown going forwards. And also, you get the wonderful mechanic of that very heavy increased haste. It feels good. Feels really interesting, does good damage. I think that should stay as a cooldown for Shadow Priests. And that's what it does. It doesn't have any negative consequences, because I am saying it should be called Surrender to Madness, but it's nothing like the current Surrender to Madness. It literally is Void form. That's all it is. It puts you into Void form, and then the Insanity will start draining away. So if it's a minimum amount of time, that means that weaker players aren't punished. Good players can get slightly more advantage out of it, but nothing too crazy. And that would work out for me. That gives Shadow Priest a really good DPS cooldown to use. It does have some ramp-up time. That's one issue. It does have some ramp-up time. But as long as it's within a Bloodlust, I think that's okay. As long as it's within a Bloodlust and you can time it that way, I think that's okay. So you don't want this cooldown to last longer than 30 seconds, is what I'm saying. It should naturally wear out before then. Those would be the major changes I would make to Shadow. Really simple, honestly. Really, really simple. I don't think it needs to be complex. And I think the complexity is where Blizzard's come unstuck. Because they've got this system that's cool. They agree it's cool. Very hard to make it work. And now they've ended up in a situation where it doesn't really matter anymore. Like, that's the problem with it. So, very, very simply, get rid of Insanity. Make it into a DPS cooldown, right? That's easily managed. It's got some benefits for all players. Make the core rotate. So, you know, the vast majority of the Shadow Priest's time is spent outside of Void form. It's only a DPS cooldown, right? It's like Incarnation or Berserk or something like that. The rest of the stuff is down to a very simple process which anybody can use, and therefore that works in all scenarios. It doesn't need to be balanced by this ever fluid, ever changing situation. And then that frees up and opens the door to talents. It frees up and opens the door because so many of the talents can now go, and that makes sense to me. That makes sense to me, is that you get rid of those talents. Nice sneeze there, Andy. You all right? Good. Frees up all these talent spots for simple things, simple, interesting things that can make it work and make the gameplay more interesting and more obvious. That's what I would do with it. I would keep it really simple, not go back to basics, but make it just a nice, workable in all scenarios class. Let me know what you think. What would you do with it? Let's do some armchair. I'll see you later, guys. Bye-bye.